apparently, and it doesn't automatic. All right, so everyone, the recording is started. I guess that's something that I'm supposed to say. And with that, let's get to the topic at hand. Bob Kovacs is joining us today. We're going to talk about the VIOS updates. We just announced it recently. We moved to VIOS 3.1. And Bob's going to, I won't steal his thunder by saying anything about it. So, Bob, I'm going to go ahead and actually have you introduce yourself a little bit, say where you really work and what your actual job is, and then you can tell us about the topic that you're going to speak on.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Bob Kovacs here. Good morning, good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yes, we're going to talk, I'm going to provide an update on Virtual Server. My role at IBM, I'm in the development lab. I'm the architect and development lead for the Virtual Server product and have been in this role for quite some time.
And I'm making you presenter now, Bob. So.
Okay, I'm looking out for that. And
there you
should
go.
Give me this. Okay, there we go. Okay, how does that
look?
I
can see your screen there. You can make it full. Okay, I see your full screen there. So there you go.
Okay, let's get started. So I don't have a lot of material today, so please feel free to post your questions there. I think, Joe, that's the right way to do it.
Yep.
We'll have plenty of time at the end to try to go through these questions and have maybe some open discussions. I don't know, do we open the lines at any time? I don't think so, do we?
No, we won't open the lines anytime. So again, guys, it's a new tool here. We're doing WebEx events, and so far it's not going too bad. But you'll find a new way to put your tool put your questions into the tool. So down, I think it's on the lower right-hand side, you can type in a question. So as you do that, then I'll try and answer some of them. If it really has to do with the topic that Bob's talking about, like he said, we should have plenty of time at the end to get to those questions. All right? So there you go, Bob. You're up and showing your screen just fine.
Very good. Okay. So the session topics today, VIOS 3.1, Iscuzzy storage, shared storage pool enhancements, and some things we're working on now and in the future around I/O virtualization. We'll talk about that in some detail. So VIOS 3.1, we're introducing a new version release of the Virtual I/O server. It's based on AIX 7.2 TL3. We were on an AIX 6.1 base for quite some time. It was time to move over, essentially modernize, and get some other goodies that were in the 7.2 base. 6.1 served as well. Really the main driver to get us to a 6.1 base, and this is several years ago, was all of the effort that went into RAS, reliability, availability, serviceability, all key capabilities for us as a Virtual I/O server. Since then, a lot of the feature functions that went into the base operating systems we were able to leverage even on a 6.1 base. So there wasn't this big driver there. But over time, we've gotten a bit bloated, and we were losing out on certain capabilities. So it made sense for us to rebase at this time. So going forward, we'll be on an AIX 7.2 TL3 base, or going forward, we'll be on a 7.2 base, I should say. We'll continue to support N-1 and N-2. That's 226 and 225, which will continue to be based on 6.1. So some of the reasons that we wanted to get there is, one, we wanted to start leveraging some of the better capabilities on the platform on an AIX. So one, we have better I/O enablement. One, when we're enabling I/O for the platform on AIX anyway, often the enablement goes into the latest, the current release, which is 7.2. And then they end up backporting that same I/O enablement onto 7.1 and 6.1. Sometimes it's not that full platinum level of enablement that we're getting. So being on a 7.2 base is going to help in that regard. We're better able to exploit features. So for instance, accelerators, all of the accelerator enablement that has all the accelerators on Power, it's only been enabled on AIX 7.2, CAPI, SMCR, virtual accelerator switch, etc. And these are all capabilities that we intend to ultimately exploit for virtualization. So now we're on a base that will allow us to do that. Our intention is to do that. We'll talk a little more about that. Also, XIVE. XIVE is a new interrupt framework, and it essentially routes interrupts much more efficiently. And given the business that the virtual I/O server is in, which is processing I/O, typically interrupt level processing, that's going to be a significant benefit for our workload for the virtual I/O server. I have a couple of asterisks there. We were intending to enable that here with our initial GA of 3.1 on P9. That enablement at the platform level has been deferred till first half 2019, firmware 930. But our plumbing is in there in VIOS 3.1. When the platform enables it, we'll be able to leverage that, and we think it'll provide benefits for the virtual I/O server. Also, again, being on a 7.2 base, it allows us to run in native compatibility mode. So, you know, so if you're now, that wasn't an option when we were based on AIX 6.1. Even on P8, we were running in P7 compat mode. Now, with VIOS 3.1, you can run in P8 mode or P9 mode, depending on what your server supports. We are now defaulting to SMT8. We were only able to support SMT4 in the past, and I can't really quantify how beneficial that is for the nature of the workloads we are busy with, but it doesn't hurt, and we've been evaluating that, and it may actually help in some cases. So we'll be SMT8 going forward. So it's a modern platform that we're here. Another thing about the VIOS over time, it was getting bloated. We had all of these bundled solutions, all these Tivoli solutions, and we had all this framework in there that was tied to IBM Systems Director and IVM and all these old Java versions. And so, you know, just applying maintenance, the maintenance window was kind of extended because we had more file. It was just growing and growing to be a bigger, let's say, service pack. And so we're starting with an AIX base that there was a concerted effort around AIX 7.2 to clean out a lot of old stuff that was no longer necessary. In addition to that, there was a bunch of, you know, the way we build virtual I/O servers, we start with a clean AIX base, and then we install all this additional packaging. Well, we've cleaned up all of that packaging. And so, again, things that are unnecessary, anything that we thought we can remove, we did. So you won't have those old Java versions, for instance. You're running some auditing scan software on your virtual I/O servers, and it flags a lot of these things as being maybe a security vulnerability, et cetera, things that are no longer supported. That should no longer be an issue on VIOS 3.1. So a lot of stuff has been removed. Also on 7.2, a lot of multipathing enhancements were introduced. A lot of focus on some of these transient or sick but not dead type errors. They're kind of like edge conditions, things that come and go. Better collaboration in multipathing between the various layers of the stack, the peripheral driver, the adapter driver layer, the protocol driver, to better coordinate how error recovery processes are run. And again, very beneficial for a VIOS type workload. Shared storage pools were based on AIX's CAA cluster-aware AIX. A lot of enhancements that went into CAA only went into AIX 7.2. So now we're on a base where we'll be able to exploit those capabilities for shared storage pools. So what else here? Platform support, as I mentioned, we'll be able to run in native compat mode on P8 and P9. The platforms that VIOS 3.1 will support will be P7+, P8, and P9. Our GA will be November 9th, 2018. You know, at that point, you'll be able to order media. You can go to the ESS website, and you'll see the ISO images out there. Now we have two images that we put out there for new releases. An ISO image for a DVD-based install, and then now we've also introduced another ISO image that is meant for a USB flash. So you can take these images and burn them onto that media and do a media install. So in terms of new feature function, really the objective, one of the key objectives of 3.1 is not so much to introduce some new disruptive technology. although we are introducing, there are some enhancements and there are some new capabilities, but the real focus is on, outage avoidance and non-disruptively updating your infrastructure with a new modern base. So that's really the focus here, to make this reliable and as least disruptive as possible to get this VIOS estate updated. When it comes to new technology, the primary introduction is Iscuzzy. Iscuzzy is it's a mature technology. Essentially, it's Scuzzy over Ethernet. We did support Iscuzzy in years past. It really never took off, and things like fiber channel over Ethernet, converged Ethernet were introduced, and so the Power platform had moved away from Iscuzzy to other directions. But it seems like we're getting interest in Iscuzzy again, and I'll talk more about it. I have some more material. So we are reintroducing it, and this does include Iscuzzy multipathing. There have been some enhancements to support multipathing for Iscuzzy, so we'll talk more about it. There are some key features that have been removed with VIOS 3.1 and on Power 9. The IVM, the Integrated Virtualization Manager, our integrated management console, essentially, that is no longer supported on VIOS 3.1 and on Power 9. Also, LPAR hibernation, also known as suspend and resume. It wasn't getting a lot of adoption. It was really driving a lot of additional tests for us. I think the way it was implemented was probably a little too cumbersome to set up, and so we've decided to pull support for that going forward. As I mentioned, to make this as little disruptive, to introduce as little disruption as possible. When it comes to this upgrade process, we did introduce, we are bringing in some tooling to help automate the process. Because often in these data centers, there are dozens, hundreds of VIOSs sometimes. And so, this is not your normal process. For instance, as you're doing a service pack maintenance, this is somewhat different. And so we want to simplify this. We've added a tool to help automate this. The basic approach for the VIOS upgrade process is, one, we do a VIOS backup of all of the customized data, the metadata. And then essentially we'll do a fresh install of this VIOS 3.1 image, and then after that we will restore that customized data. So essentially this is a migration type process. You can do a fresh install, of course, but this tool is meant to help this automation process. This can be orchestrated from NIM. Can be orchestrated from the VIOS itself, requires VIOS 22630 minimum, or it can be orchestrated from the HMC. And there are three bullets here. I'm not going to go through this eye chart in any real detail, but the most common VIOS configuration, dual VIOS, and this tool helps you do a rolling upgrade, one VIOS at a time. You can, and that's essentially a non-disruptive VIOS upgrade, and you can do that from 224, 225, or 226. No need to update to a specific, the latest service pack level, let's say, for that traditional, common dual VIOS configuration. It gets a little more complex for the VIOSs that are grouped together or clustered together in SSP clusters. One item that I didn't mention on the previous chart, some of the plumbing that has changed with VIOS 3.1, maybe not everybody's aware, but the VIOS has a database. It's not surfaced up for customer use, it's for our internal housekeeping. It used to be based on SolidDB. We changed that in 3.1 to Postgres. And so in most cases, again, that's not relevant, but if in the case of the SSP cluster, it sort of does become relevant. So if you want to upgrade your SSP cluster in a non-disruptive way, one node at a time, where there's not an outage to the client, we would require that you first upgrade all of your nodes to 22630, which was just released in September. it has some of that plumbing that we need, namely that database that I mentioned. And once you do that interim step, then you can do this rolling upgrade one node at a time of the SSP cluster, ultimately upgrading it to 3.1 without an outage at the client LPARs. If you're able to withstand an outage to your cluster, another approach for the cluster update is just to upgrade all the nodes concurrently. In that case, of course, there would be an outage, but you can skip that interim step of getting to 226.30 prior to that. And there is a lot of information on this tooling out there. And so we have man pages and documentation. There's lots of detail there. We're constantly updating our documentation. I will mention, we were talking about in the pre-call, we have had an ESP program for VIOS 3.1 where we partnered with various customers, internal, external, business partners, et cetera, on a early support program or beta program for VIOS 3.1. And this has been going on for several months now. It's been very beneficial both for us and we think for our customers, where we put this out into production, or we put this out into these environments, and customers are doing various scenarios, kicking the tires, giving us feedback. In the end, a lot of this feedback is rolled into our documentation. Sometimes we made some code changes, so I think it's really helped our product and really has helped our GA, which is right around the corner. So I don't really have the opportunity to pause and ask questions, so I'm just going to keep on going. And again, I think we'll just try to go through all of the comments or questions at the end of the presentation. As I mentioned, the one new feature function, or the primary new feature function in VIOS 3.1 is reintroducing Iscuzzy storage. Again, this is mature technology, Iscuzzy, or I should say Scuzzy commands and responses encapsulated in TCP. Nothing new there. You know, we have different customer personas that we try to work with, and we've been working more and more with cloud providers and fiber channel SAN, frankly, which is where the majority of our power customers are firmly planted. But in the so on-premise is fiber channel SAN, but in these cloud environments, it's network storage often, and that's one of the reasons that we are reintroducing Iscuzzy. We want to be a better platform for cloud computing, both on-premise and public cloud, and we do have some partners out there, and so that's a key persona we're trying to accommodate here. But also our traditional enterprise customers, they too have been more and more interested in network storage, and that may evolve over time. Right now, we think that's Iscuzzy, and some of our customers think that's Iscuzzy. But as Tracy mentioned, there's a lot of stuff going on in the industry around NVMe over fabrics, which would be another type of network storage. But we're getting our foot in the door with Iscuzzy. And again, some of these enterprise customers, and for various reasons, they're seeing more and more interest in Iscuzzy. They see the network adapter roadmaps, and they're seeing 100 gig, 200 gig, 400 gig, just the speeds, going very high. Or they may, they know how to manage networks. They may be interested in collapsing silos and collapsing that one storage silo with the network silo, or what have you, or whatever the reasons are. Simplicity, cost of reusing the existing network infrastructure instead of having to have SAN infrastructure. So who knows, but we are reintroducing this technology, and we think there's lots of opportunities for improvement, and we're going to let the industry and our partners and our customers help drive our roadmap. So in terms of some of the details here, it will be another vSCSI technology. So from a client perspective, they'll see that same generic virtual SCSI device that they've always seen. There's no impacts to these client operating systems. They don't have to, apply a service pack for some new enablement. It's just your same generic virtual SCSI device. We're just supporting, traditional vSCSI initially. SSP will be in the future, planned for the future. Now, one difference here is instead of using an Iscuzzy offload adapter like a tow adapter, like we did last time. In this case, we're using the Iscuzzy software initiator stack. And so that's primarily, well, it's software on top of standard NICs. It does provide some flexibility. You can use any NIC from 1 gig to 100 gig and anything in between. Our focus has been primarily around 25 gig. A lot of our early kind of interested customer partners are on 25 gig, but most of our testing has been 10 gig and 25 gig, I should say. We know that it's a software stack, and we've identified some efficiencies that we can build into that stack to better leverage higher speed adapters, 40 gig, 100 gig. We're not able to, saturate to 25 gig just yet. And so we have a roadmap around this to improve that, but any of these adapters will work. It will be VIOS 3.1 only, so won't be supported on any of the previous versions. Will be supported on both P8 and P9. If you're on P8, we do have a minimum firmware requirement of 860. So if you try to export an Iscuzzy LUN from the VIOS as a virtual device, we'll verify that you're at least at 860. Otherwise, we'll disallow it. The client operating support for our initial release here with 3.1 will be AIX and Linux. As I mentioned, no development impacts or changes to these client operating systems, but it does require tests, and IBMI has deferred their testing till later. We expect that that'll be there in 2019. We will support boot, and all of the plumbing is in there for boot, but for this initial release, we haven't partnered with any storage vendor to actually certify boot, so we're not claiming boot support at this time, but we expect that that'll change in 2019, and that'll be P9 only. We do have Power VC support. There's an asterisk there because the current designation is as a tech preview. Now it's been tested and so forth, but not everything is there to the level that you normally want for primarily a test statement to be able to claim GA. So we're working with the Power VC team. We're hoping to remove that tech preview designation sometime soon, but as of GA, that'll be essentially a tech preview, and that's Power VC 1.4. We also have a CLI from the VIOS, so you can manage your Iscuzzy devices that way. In terms of device discovery, we'll support ISNS. If you have an ISNS server out there, you can connect to that to help the device discovery process. We also have, again, the command line setup type stuff, which is our ODM and database. That's how that's persisted. One limitation is that with virtual SCSI, traditional virtual SCSI, you could take a device and carve it up into partitions or logical volumes, export those logical volumes as virtual SCSI devices. That is not allowed for Iscuzzy devices, at least not at this time. So we do require that the entire volume, the entire LUN, is exported as a virtual, as a device, and we also enforce that. So from the beginning, this was meant to be another enterprise-level solution, so tried to get all the enterprise-level capabilities in there. Live partition mobility is supported, certainly dual VIOS configurations. Multipathing was something that we had to add for Iscuzzy. So within the VIOS, of course, you can have multiple ports, multiple paths within the virtual house server for port redundancy, failover, load balancing. That's all in there within the virtual house server. Okay, was there anything else I wanted to cover on this slide? And I'm not, by the way, I'm in full screen mode. I don't see any questions coming by, so.
So Bob, let me throw a question at you that kind of applies maybe to this slide a little bit. You mentioned LPM.
Yes.
Can you LPM between older versions of VIOS and this? If you have VIOS on two different machines, two different VIOS,
Well, so in general, Joe, normally when it comes to LPM, you can mix and match your versions of VIOS as long as that version of VIOS supports the underlying technology. Same here, because Iscuzzy is minimum requires VIOS 3.1. Both if you're trying to, if the clients are using virtual SCSI devices backed by Iscuzzy, then the minimum VIOS version supported on source and destination has to be VIOS 3.1.
Okay. And I want to, so I'm kind of looking through the questions here too, so I'm kind of where I'm getting this from. But I just want to clarify the OS support, Bob. So you said, it says here on your slide, AIX and Linux, and you said IBMI was testing. Is that specific to just the Iscuzzy, or is that kind of an overall? I mean, if I'm using IBMI in other ways, does it support 3.1?
Yes, IBMI does support 3.1 for, all of the this is purely an Iscuzzy statement on this slide, so certainly IBMI will support VIOS 3.1 when we first introduce it for all the, I'll call them legacy capabilities, whether it's MPIV, vSCSI using SAN, shared Ethernet, VNIC, et cetera, LPM. So yes, all the bullets here are purely related to Iscuzzy.
Okay, all right, great. There are a bunch of questions. I think we'll just save them until we get to the end, back on your slide where you talked about migration. But we'll read through those, and you can see the specifics when we get to that. So I'll go ahead and, I guess, go on for now. Thanks.
Okay. So just for clarity here, I put a few common Iscuzzy topologies out here. The first one is the one that I've been describing, essentially traditional virtual SCSI here. It shows that Iscuzzy devices were provisioned to the virtual IO server. Virtual IO server will discover, instantiate these devices, and then from there they're provisioned as virtual SCSI devices to the client operating system. And they show up as generic virtual SCSI devices. That is what, number one, we're GAing here in November with VIOS 3.1. The second one, similar, Iscuzzy devices provisioned to the VIOS. They're kind of grouped together or pooled, and then we pop our clustered file system on top of it. That's our shared storage pool configuration, not supporting that in November. Number three is also a supported configuration, and what that's showing is these client operating systems, they have their own Iscuzzy software initiator stack. That includes AIX and Linux anyway. And you could directly access those Iscuzzy LUNs over a network. That network could be through a physical NIC, in which case the VIOS wouldn't be there, or it could be through the VIOS using our virtual network interfaces, virtual Ethernet, or VNIC. That configuration, probably less common, but is supported and was tested here for our release. Okay, so primarily one, though, was the focus of my presentation back there. And in terms of redundancy, I'm not going to go through these. This is an old vSCSI redundancy chart. Just want to show that nothing changes. All of these are still viable options. The most common configuration is the one on the bottom in the center, which is dual VIOS, multipathing in the client, multipathing in the virtual IO servers, no single point of failure. But any of these configurations will continue to work for your redundancy needs. And just briefly, in terms of future candidates for Iscuzzy, as I mentioned, we will support Iscuzzy boot. It'll be P9 only. We expect to add support for SSP for Iscuzzy. We expect the IBMI client to be right around the corner. Again, that's vSCSI. Performance and optimization, there are lots of opportunities here, as I mentioned. And we'll figure out, this is kind of getting our foot in the door. I mean, it's an enterprise solution as well as capabilities, but in terms of performance and optimizations and efficiencies, we know that there are adapter offloads. TCP, maybe a full Iscuzzy adapter offload. ISEER, which is RDMA of Iscuzzy technology, that's a possibility. LRDMA is a platform capability that we normally use for virtual SCSI and MPIV and VNIC, where we can avoid data copies, the buffers, the user data between the client operating system and the VIOS. For vSCSI traditional and MPIV, we don't copy data. We're just copying commands and responses. The data itself goes directly to and from the memory buffers in the client to and from the devices, right, off the PCI bus. And that's a technology called LRDMA. We're not currently using that for this Iscuzzy solution, just like we don't use it for shared Ethernet adapter. And that extra copying, it does add some latencies, it does add some overhead in terms of CPU. So we know we can be much more efficient. And now, particularly now that we have these high-speed adapters, we need to explore these efficiencies, and that's what we expect a lot of our work around this solution to be in 2019. Additional storage attach options. So out of the door, unlike, I'll just say that we're open storage attach. If the storage solution claims to be a Iscuzzy compliant target, we'll support you attaching to it. Unlike in the fiber channel world where we have these different categories supported, then tested, recognized, and then another other one, we're just going with open storage attached for now and see how far that takes us with our customers. Maybe they'll want a different approach, but I think that's easiest for all involved. I will say we have focused most of our testing on a select few set of devices, the ones that we think are most common in the customer environments. One thing that we are hearing loud and clear as we discuss this with some of our partners, customer partners, et cetera, is that, okay, well, the data, or we should say our devices and our data are now in the network, and it just feels and probably is more vulnerable. And for that reason, we want to be able to secure our data. And so we've been working quite a bit in identifying what we can do around encrypting this Iscuzzy traffic, data in flight, encrypting that data in flight. And what we're looking at is using IPsec and a framework that both the server and the storage targets can use for managing these keys and certificates. So we have some good people in the security team helping us with that. Also, device discovery, I mentioned ISNS and so forth. There are other ones out there. If those are important to our customers, then we'll explore enabling additional device discovery technologies. Okay, let me do a quick, I just want to do a time check. Let's just keep moving along. Shared storage pools. This is our clustered storage. It has a lot of it has a lot of cloud-like capabilities, so we call it also our cloud storage. And we have been in recent years just focusing on functionality, various ease of use enablement. Once Power VC enabled it, the uptake of SSP has been tremendous, really. And a lot of focus on functionality. We added the tiers and the mirroring capabilities and flash technology and link clones and this and that. And so there's been a lot of feature function and also around scalability in terms of number of devices, number of VMs we support, number of nodes. Right now, our focus is on resiliency. There's been a lot of adoption here. We've learned a lot about how this product, behaves in the customer data center where, networks are going up and down and this and that. And so we're just focusing on really hardening this thing. A lot of that focus is around the network itself. Often you'll have a network outage, and right now that is too impactful for our SSP. You don't want to lose a network only to then lose access to your storage. So one item we're enabling here in 2018 is just the use of VIPA, which is the virtual IP address. You can set it up such that you have a primary network that the SSP is using for node communication, internode communication. If that were to have an issue, it would automatically fail over to the alternate IP address and alternate network setup. And there are other various things that we identified in the field, ways that we could limit the impact of certain issues. Sometimes we would have issues that would result in cluster-wide problems. There are some things we're doing where we can limit that to individual node. I won't go through all the various types of details there, but these are all lessons learned in working with field problems, et cetera. And one other thing that we did along these lines is we've created a dedicated large-scale test environment that we're continually flushing out these types of problems. One thing that we found was with each release and each service pack release, we would create an SSP environment, and we would throw everything in the kitchen sink at it. But then often it would get torn down. And one difference is that our customers, their SSP environments are up for months or years. And some of the problems we were running into were not realized in our own test environment because they're not long-lived environments. So part of this SSP test cluster is a long-lived type environment. So we can really mimic exactly what our customers are doing. And we think this is providing significant results for us. And then future, more 2019 type things, the primary objective, and I think, till we get here, we can never say that this thing is indestructible. And this is, we want to be able to complete we want to be able to tolerate a complete outage of all networks. So we're building and plumbing under the covers under SSP so that, its primary interface could be a network, and then its backup failover interface would be another network. And in the event that they both went down, we would communicate over the SAN, over the storage network, to keep the cluster up and operational. So this is what we call DP Comm, and this is a way to tolerate those full network outages and keep your network up and operational. So that's something we'll deliver in 2019, and that's I think that's going to be excellent technology. Just other ease of gathering, cluster-wide type thing. Again, same thing. You have this cluster, and often there's various components involved here, and trying to gather first failure data so that we can better understand what the issue is, what the slowdown or the outage, whatever it is. Making that easier to gather with a single hit of a button, you can gather cluster-wide information from all the nodes. And just the odds and ends that we're doing to make reliability, usability, and so forth better for SSP. I won't go through all of these in great detail. So let's keep on going to the VIOS release strategy. So again, most folks are probably familiar with this. Every year we generally have a new feature function release for VIOS where we introduce new capabilities. And that release has a standard life of 3 years. And for those 3 years, we deliver only service packs and individual bug fixes. Those service packs include bug fixes and hardware enablement, I/O and servers. So, the basic model is you can invest in a particular release and know for 3 years that we're not introducing any risk. We're just providing, fixes and hardware enablement such that it just gets more and more reliable over time. And that's a basic premise there. 2.2.6, which was released in fourth quarter 2017, that'll be our last 2.2 version. After that, will be based on an AIX 7.2 base, starting with AIX 7.2 TL3. So VIOS 3.1, November 2018, we should expect VIOS 3.1.1 in 2019. Okay. Yeah, I won't go through those down there. I'll just, in terms of P9 enablement, that's really been a lot of our focus in 2018. Back in March, we had a VIOS service pack 22621, which enabled our lower end boxes, the 922 and these other smaller Power 9 boxes. Followed by enablement for our N-1 and N-2 in May. That was 22460 and 22540. And then in August, we enabled our mid-range boxes, that's the 950s and so forth. That both of these, both the 22621 and 22623 had new media. But that August release enabled our 950s. And then here in September, it was our 2-node 980. I normally use code names, so I'm just trying to translate those here. So in September, we had 22630, which enabled the 2-node 980. And then here, right around the corner, we'll have 22632 for those that will remain on the 226 base, which I think will be the majority. as well as VIOS 3.1.0.10, which is our first service pack. These will enable our 4-node 980s, but of course, it's the 4-node 980 and everything before. All of these versions will be supported on P7 Plus, as I mentioned, P8 and P9. So I hope that's clear. Okay, let's just spend a few minutes here on some of the future roadmaps and priorities and just general trends and directions. So what we need to do is, there's lots of stuff going on, but the two primary things are updating our stacks, I would say, to better handle high-speed devices, and that's becoming a key priority. And so I'll talk more about that on the next slide, what I mean here. But net, I would say a lot of these operating systems have atrophied a little bit or in need of an improvement in certain ways, because these high-speed devices are uncovering some bottlenecks that can and should be addressed. In some cases, they already have been. And this, for us, is kind of a journey that we're on. It's been going on for some time now, and we're still on that journey. And I'll talk more about that. They're all kind of related here. The enhanced VIOS MPIV scaling has to do with that, as well as the optimizations for low latency storage. Increasing the number of MPIV ports for physical adapter ports. So today we're at 64. This is MPIV. This really relates to the number of virtual fiber channel adapters you can map to a particular physical port. With our new 32 gig adapter, it has more adapter resources that allow us to sort of fan that out higher. So we expect to be able to support up to 256 in 2019 for the 32 gig adapter only. And as I mentioned before, P9 has this new interrupt engine or interrupt framework. We'll enable that in the first half. Cloud and infrastructure, that too continues to be a big focus for us. NVMe over fabrics. I'll say just a few more words here. You know, we did introduce NVMe here in 2018 on both 226 and 3.1, this for VIOS. And the primary use cases are, well, the NVMe that we have today is under the cover NVMe, right? So it's just locally attached NVMe. And for VIOS, you can put your boot device on there, or you could actually bring them in and partition them up into logical volumes and export those as virtual Iscuzzy devices for use by the client. Well, and the other use case is VIOS has this flash cache technology where we transparently keep the blocks that we determine to be hot in the local cache instead of out on the device. It's kind of a write-through cache, and that's an SSP technology. It's called our flash cache. You can use NVMe for that as well. So those are the three use cases: boot, virtual Iscuzzy, NVMe, NVMe flash. And in the future, as Tracy was mentioned, there's this NVMe over fabrics. And there's a lot of, there's a lot of buzz about that, maybe hype, I don't know, but there's just a lot of interest in it. And there's also a lot of churn. What we expect to see in 2019, at least on power, is probably NVMe over fiber channel. And we'll support that in the virtual I/O server pretty much as a virtual Iscuzzy device. So you can get connectivity, you can virtualize it, but it's not really meant to be optimized for NVMe. And one of the reasons we're doing that is we're keeping a close eye on this roadmap in terms of where the industry is going, where power is going. If it turns out that NVMe over NVMe over fiber channel get some traction, then we will enable it essentially an MPIV type implementation where we'll have a native NVMe driver on the client, the peripheral driver. So you can take advantage of this protocol and the efficiencies in that software stack using NPIV. But if it turns out that, and a lot of the industry seems to be focusing on this, if it turns out NVMe over Fiber Channel is just a stepping stone to get to NVMe over Rocky, our VIOS and virtualization implementation would be different. It would be more of a Rocky RDMA type implementation. So we don't want to invest a lot in that NVMe over Fiber Channel virtualization. We'll just support it as vSCSI until we find out that it really is going to have staying power, as I mentioned. So that's something that we're watching very closely. We expect Rocky, SROV Rocky in 2019. Iscuzzy optimizations. It's not only the adapter offloads and avoiding those data copies. We know that our Iscuzzy stack has some inefficiencies in there. It's kind of an old stack. We have been, AIX has had that for a long time. We have in our evaluation here leading up to this GA have identified some good efficiencies there that just we know that's something we have to do for 2019. So we'll do that. And then I mentioned the SSP multi-interface node interconnect, which is both network and storage. So that's another key deliverable. Let's see here. So just a little more about that I/O transformation. And let's see, I'm not able to see. I'm not sure, Joe, is portion of my screen obstructed? It is on my, I have this pop-up. Okay, good. So essentially, I'll try to be brief here, that a lot of these stacks that were developed to deliver, to drive network and storage, they were developed in a different era where we had these slow mechanical moving devices outside of the server, and they were really slow. If you did a performance evaluation of a latency of, let's say, some storage I/O, and you measured it, and you measured how much of that latency was inside the server, let's say software and the other parts inside the server, versus outside of the server, it was, 95% of the latency was outside of the server as that mechanical moving arm went over, and then a very small portion of that latency was inside the server. That has been completely flipped on its head now. And if you did that same measurement for an I/O, a lot of it is inside the server. And it's not, and why is that? These servers are super fast. Well, it's the way a lot of these device drivers were constructed. They didn't have to be that efficient. They can hide behind those excessive latencies outside of the server. And so what you find is these stacks do not have channelization or parallelism, or often called multi-queue. They have these single queues, and they have these gross locks that lock across all these devices or all these adapters, and just god-awful type stuff. So one of the reasons NVMe, for instance, does so well is because they were creating new stacks to drive it. It's a new protocol. They can develop a new device driver stack. And often what they do is collapse the stack, and they focus on multi-queue or parallelism. Well, those same concepts need to be applied to Fiber Channel and SCSI. The networking teams have been doing a pretty good job because they're getting these 100 gig adapters and so forth. So they've been doing a lot of that. But there's some legacy stuff still out there. When it comes to Fiber Channel, for instance, AIX, they already parallelized their physical Fiber Channel stack and saw tremendous results. And we've been using that device driver stack in the VIOS for some time now. Our objective is to do that, to get that same parallelization, or MQ, end-to-end, from the client through the hypervisor and through the VIOS. And again, we saw, like, for some basic common type workloads with the Fiber Channel work, we saw 2x improvement in terms of latencies and throughput, and we would expect to see similar types of improvements if we did this end-to-end. So we're restructuring these device drivers, getting additional support from our hypervisor. So, this is a journey. We're halfway there. That's where a lot of the focus is going. The right hand, so if you look at the middle box there in the VIOS, that's kind of where we are now, where that side of it is parallelized. We're working on getting that the same way through the client, which is the client LPAR, and through the hypervisor. And that's going to be a 2019 deliverable for NPIV, and we're using AIX NPIV as kind of a proving ground. We're talking also to the Linux and IBM I folks. I don't have dates to share there, but we expect we'll have this for the AIX client for NPIV. And the same kind of things can be applied to other stacks. Shared Ethernet, for instance, is low-hanging fruit, maybe even Iscuzzy. If we're starting to see, let's see, a reemergence of Iscuzzy, these types of optimizations need to be applied to that stack. And when I say reemergence of Iscuzzy, we know currently our Iscuzzy is going to be a Iscuzzy technology. We know the current implementation for NVMe is Iscuzzy. So maybe we'll see some more, an uptick of Iscuzzy again, and if so, then we'll do similar type things. So, 2019 should see that middle box there, but we know there's other efficiencies that can be made there, and essentially there are some hardware on Power 9 called this virtual accelerator switch. Essentially, it allows you to push a cache line between two LPARs in an authorized manner that that's been set up based on kind of a similar CRQ technology that we're using today through the hypervisor. But we can set up these memory windows and use this hardware accelerator to offload certain, let's say, their performance critical paths for virtual I/O, essentially bypassing the hypervisor for performance critical I/O, requests and responses. We're not moving data. We're just moving the I/O request to the VIOS, the response back to the client in a much more efficient way. Net, when I talked about those latencies, if you measure them now that are inside the server, a lot of that is just path length, context switches, inefficient locking, a lot of those stuff. If we could bypass the hypervisor in a very authorized manner, it would really tremendously impact our I/O performance. I think that second box is going to be a tremendous benefit for 2019. That third box is just going to put it in turbo mode. And so I don't have a date to share there. We've been playing around with it. We've been proving that hardware out, and it looks good. And so so what happened was when we first introduced NPIV and we did performance evaluation, we can take a configuration using physical I/O, just let's say AIX attached to a physical fiber channel SAN, run a particular benchmark, and if everything was set up properly, we can run that same benchmark in an NPIV configuration and get similar performance results. I mean, just right there, if not equal, just a little bit off. So virtualization overhead was minimal when we were using things like 8 gig fiber channel adapters and rotational media in the storage. Now it's a different world where we have this flash storage, very high speed adapters, 32 gig, and so our objective is to be able to get to that same point where the overhead of virtualization can be pretty much mitigated and lessened, and that's our objective. So lots of work to do there, but that's part of our modernization thing, and it's a journey. We'll get there, and we're making good progress in getting there. You're probably all familiar with this. This is just we have been much more involved in social, getting involved socially. So we do have a Power VM blog. There's some other blogs out there. If you're not already registered, I'd recommend doing it. It's a good way to have a dialogue directly with the development lab. Okay, and that is all the material I had, and so I think
well, we have several questions out there, Bob, so you can probably, I think even with sharing, if you go up to the top, you can pull down and click on the little questions, there's a little tab to show the questions. Unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly what it looks like right now.
Let's see, what am I looking for? The modern view. You are sharing. Oh.
Up in the.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, at the very top of your screen, I think there's a little tabby that if you click on it, it'll pull down and give you options for looking at other things. And it'll pull out the Q&A box for you if you want. So for everybody that's out there, if you type something into the chat, it's probably best to type it into the question pane instead. I see that there are some things into the chat, so just to let you know that. So we'll kind of go through here. Let me see if I can just, while you're looking at that, pull up a couple of things. All right, just turn. So there were question on Systems Director. Systems Director is gone. We're done with it. We're not really using Systems Director at all. It's not built into the VIOS. Kind of we had some HMC stuff that was built on Systems Director at one time. It came and went pretty quick, so there's no Systems Director. So we mentioned about the VIOS 3.1 is announced, available in November. So Bob, can you say, is there an exact date that this is available, and will it be then people can go to the ESS, the entitled Software Support site, and download it at that time? Oh, did we lose Bob? Oh, here I see. There, are you back, Bob?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I think you were muted somehow.
Yeah, okay.
So did you hear my question then?
Oh, yes. I think in terms of availability, yes. So on November 9th, we GA, and then at that time you can order media. Or if you go to the ESS site on November 9th, the ISO images will be available. That is our first, those ISO images will be images of our first service pack. So it'll be 3, 1, 0, 10. Now, I'm in discussions now in terms of when Fix Central will have those that first service pack. But yes, ESS will have the latest and greatest as of November 9th.
Okay.
I'm going to scroll back a little bit, Joe. There's one question here, good one. Let's see, this is from Cole. And any improvement on LPM on VIOS 3.1? There is, there have been some improvements. I didn't mention it here in 2018 on as of firmware 920. And this is primarily a hypervisor deliverable. It doesn't really have a dependency on VIOS 3.1, but it does require firmware 920. And beginning there, transparently under the covers, as long as both your source and destination are 920 on P9, it will compress and encrypt the LPM data between source and destination. So yes, we think that's quite an improvement. So this compression, and now we have these little offload engines on Power 9 that do a much more efficient job of compression and then encryption. And so yes, data will be automatically firmware 920 compressed and encrypted.
Yeah, so I saw actually some charts on that at TechU. It's quite a dramatic performance improvement for live partition mobility. But be clear, it's between two Power 9s. They both have to be Power 9 running that 920 firmware that Bob mentioned, and then it will use it. If you're doing with any other system, it cannot do that compression and encryption because the other hardware and such isn't built into it. So just to be clear on that, but quite dramatic if you're using it with the Power 9 920 firmware.
Yes. Yeah, if you can keep on reading those, because I was able to pull down chat, which had private messages to me, which included a few.
So there's a Q&A probably.
Okay.
Let me read this one, and then you can. So this one is for the VIOL power, and this is gonna be a depends answer, I'm sure. CPU and memory requirements for this new version. How are they different from the old one?
Thank you for asking that. I meant to mention that. So we don't expect any changes there. I'd say that there's still some late evaluation going on. Our performance team is still doing a lot of their work. I will say that what's changing here is the underlying operating system version. And often it's not really the underlying operating system version that dictates our resource requirements, CPU, memory. So we don't expect the minimum required CPU or memory to change. And as of yet, we've still not seen anything that would change what our basic recommendations is for various configurations, whether it's shared Ethernet, SSP, or any of these other capabilities.
All right. So there's a couple of questions, Bob, on compatibility. So if you're running the VIOS 3.1, is there any issues with compatibility of running AIX LPARs, running AIX 6.1 or 7.1 or anything like that?
No, and this kind of goes, so in the end, really what the connection is between the client and the VIOS is standard Ethernet and standard Iscuzzy. And so, just like when we would introduce a new technology level or new release of VIOS, let's say the difference between 224 and 226, it didn't drive an impact for those standard technologies to the client operating system. If you wanted to leverage some new capability, maybe, but when it comes to basic connectivity, virtual Iscuzzy, or networking, or MPIV, those we supported those various combinations. VIOS 3.1 is just the same. It's just the same MPIV. It's the same virtual Iscuzzy, shared Ethernet, VNIC, LPM. So no, I don't anticipate any compatibility problems along those lines. And we've been testing. The test matrix is huge, and I think we've hit all of those combinations.
Okay.
Nothing's come up.
There's a couple questions on being able to get down a test version. It's really not available until the GA date of that Bob mentioned in November 9th. So you have to wait for then until you can download it from ESS or wherever. So there was a lot of questions on the upgrade stuff. So probably want to go back and review that a little bit, Bob. In this one in particular, it says, is it an upgrade or is it an overwrite installation?
Yes. Yeah, no, it is an overwrite installation. And we've learned quite a few lessons. There was a time many years ago when we had a similar upgrade process to go from VIOS version 1 essentially to version 2. And we tried to make that a migration, and it was time consuming, it had multiple reboots, it was complex. This is meant to be much quicker, much easier, much simpler. It is an override. So the basic approach is, and we have some tooling here to help facilitate this, and this can be done manually, but the tooling would a VIOS BR, which is essentially a backup of all of the customized information in your VIOS. I shouldn't say all of it. There are some things we're finding that sometimes customers customize and they would like that preserved, but all of the device information, all of that device, all the stuff that's traditional VIOS, that is backed up. And then that's saved off in a safe spot, and then when you do, and then it does a fresh install of this VIOS 3.1. Again, this can be done from NIM, this can be done from the VIOS itself, could be done from HMC, and it, we have the BOSS install option, we have the alt disk install option, so lots of different approaches can be taken here, but it does a fresh install, and that's key here. Nothing is saved in that regard, and then after that install process, we restore that metadata that was saved off, all the device mappings and a few other odds and ends. One example of something that isn't currently saved and restored is like NTP settings and things like that. So there may be some things over time that we enhance the tool and VIOS BR to support. But basically, you have all your device mappings preserved and reestablished. But we are on a 7.2 base now, so what's common for customers is they put some type of operating environment, an SOE, that they've customized for their VIOSs, and they like to apply to all their VIOSs. That would have to be applied on top after this install process. That would have needed to be, there's nothing for us to preserve there. A lot of that stuff that's there wouldn't really be right for 7.2, for an AIX 7.2 base. So yeah, and again, there's a ton of a lot of the effort for VIOS 3.1 went into describing the tooling and the process around the whole upgrade process. So should be available soon for review.
Okay, so maybe you covered this, and I was reading through here, but it says, so when you're upgrading to 3.1, are any of the file systems removed, like /admin?
When we're upgrading to 3.1, are any of the file systems removed? So there's nothing that's preserved. So everything it's really a clean install is the way to think of it.
All right. I just want to make sure since there was a separate one on that. Somebody asked, so if they're on a Power 7 system, which doesn't support 3.1, should they just upgrade to 226.30 just to be like on its final? Is that the recommendation?
So if you're on a Power 7 system, you're correct. VIOS 3.1 is not supported, but again, we'll continue to support N-1 and N-2. So, 226 will live at least, it was introduced in fourth quarter of 2017, and just standard support is for 3 years. So we will continue to provide service packs, which are, again, bug fixes and hardware enablement, I/O and server, through 2020, at least through fourth quarter 2020 for 3 years. So for sure, there's a lot, there's a roadmap for 226. And so, yeah, you can go to the latest 226 on your P7 systems, and you can continue to make updates to those P7 systems for however long they're in support.
Okay. We'll, when we start shipping after this is GA'd, and we ship Power Systems that have the VIOS installed, pre-installed, will it be 3.1?
I'm sorry, Joe. Can you repeat that? It was a pre-install question, right?
Yeah, it was pre-installed. So if we're shipping Power 9 systems with the VIOS pre-installed, will it be 3.1 after the 9th?
Yeah, that's a good question. I probably should have mentioned it. So another thing that's being discontinued, kind of tied to our pulling of IVM, but not only that. But remember, I mentioned we're deprecating IVM. We're also not supporting pre-install of VIOS on P9. So as of P9, there's no longer a pre-install option for VIOS.
All right. There's a question on, AIX 7.2. We have the whole upgrade without taking it down.
LKU? Yes.
Yeah. So will we be able to do a non-disruptive upgrade to the VIOS now since it's built on 7.2?
Well, so the VIOS already has a non-disruptive upgrade path, and that is because they're deployed in pairs. And I think, probably 95% of VIOSs, if not more, are deployed in pairs. We essentially have we already have that solved. You do a rolling upgrade of your VIOS one at a time, in the end avoiding an outage to the important part, which is the client workloads, right? So LKU actually is an interesting technology. They actually rely on LPM to facilitate an LKU operation, and so they rely on the VIOS and the data mover and so forth. And the VIOS, because it has physical resources, it cannot be LPM'd essentially. So no, we don't have an LKU option for VIOS. It's not on the roadmap, but there are methods of achieving a non-disruptive upgrade of the VIOS. And when I say non-disruptive, I mean from the client operating system perspective.
Right. Good. And this one is, does the backup iOS command automatically detect shared storage pool configuration and create a VIOS BR backup file?
Not that I'm aware of. So the backup iOS is essentially a make-sys-B, and it takes, it essentially creates a make-sys-B of your VIOS. I don't remember any effort to detect an SSP and do a VIOS BR, so I think the answer is no. I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding the gist of what's behind that question, but This is this material being made available to the audience, Joe?
Oh, that's a great question. So yes, the charts here are all on the Power Systems VUG wiki, and everybody should be able to go out to the wiki there and download the presentation that you sent me, Bob. And for everybody, all the notes you get from me, if you got a note from me or the invite or everything, it should have a link to the wiki in all those notes and calendar invites.
So I think the final page has my email address on there, and feel free to, on that question about, detecting there's an SSP there and kicking off a VIOS BR, this is the backup iOS question, just shoot me a note if you can give me some more details, what the objectives are there, and maybe this makes sense. So, we also have this RFE process where the field can submit requests for feature function or changes to certain capabilities. That's always another avenue to get that information to us.
Okay. So the next question I have for you then, Bob, has to do with the limitation, performance limitation. So the question is, have any enhancements been made to the limitation of the VNIC performance on the VIOC? So it says it's like right now about 1 to 2 gigabit per second performance. Is there anything special around that?
Is this a VNIC or a shared Ethernet?
In the question, yeah, and in the question it specifically says virtual NIC performance.
Does it say shared Ethernet in there anywhere? I'm not looking at it.
No, it doesn't.
Okay. Well, I will say, so shared Ethernet does have some known limitations, and there are some, it's a single queue virtual adapter pair, and they did everything they could to sort of get the best performance they could at a shared Ethernet. VNIC is the newer technology. It's a multi-queue technology. It's kind of tied to SRIOV. It's meant to be much more efficient, higher IO-op capabilities, and they continue to look at that, identifying where there can be improvements in VNIC. And so yes, I think there have been some recent changes, and they'll continue to be focused and on that VNIC to improve it, to make it the best it can be. So it's meant to be much more efficient, higher IO ops, much more efficient in terms of CPU and memory. We're not copying data with VNIC, unlike shared Ethernet. And it's meant to just be a better performer, and it's been being improved, and it continues to be improved. So VNIC is our higher performance option. Right now, no plans to improve shared Ethernet beyond where it is today.
Right, and I'm glad you mentioned SEA, because then there's another question on here about SEA performance as well. So it says Power VM VIOS Iscuzzy works with P7 Plus.
Power VM vSCSI works with P7 Plus?
Yes, that's the question?
It does. It does.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you mentioned the firmware requirements in one of your charts. This is compatible with Power VC. I think I heard you say that.
And I'm also scrolling probably a little higher. We may be going in different directions. I'll just confirm. I think you may have mentioned it. You did mention it. I will confirm that we've gotten rid of Systems Director. The plumbing is not in terms from the VIOS perspective. Also, we've also removed any of the plumbing that was in there, which was actually quite significant, and also pulled in some old Java versions that were problematic and so forth. So, by removing Systems Director, that really helped us sort of slim down the VIOS footprint.
Okay. Is there a firmware requirement for Power 8 in the VIOS 3.1? So we'll support, VIOS 3.1 will generally support, any Power 8 firmware if you're running on Power 8, except if you wanted the Iscuzzy capability. We have a minimum firmware level of 860. Okay, good. This one the question specifically says non-Iscuzzy, but that's good to know. So 860 if you want Iscuzzy, otherwise no firmware requirement.
Right.
The question here says so that VIOS LPARs can no longer use NPIV. That's not true. NPIV is still supported. The VIOS LPARs really, VIOS LPARs never really used, and the VIOS LPAR itself didn't use NPIV, did it?
So no change here in terms of VIOS support. The VIOS will continue to support NPIV. The VIOS 3.1 is not changing that. NPIV is our predominant virtual storage technology, and again, our customers are very much parked on fiber channel SAN. We are making improvements in it. We're continuing to invest. As I mentioned, a lot of those optimizations are focused on our NPIV configurations.
Okay. There's a question here: will there be the ability to rename LUNs in the shared storage pool?
That is a item on our roadmap. It's not currently plan of record, so I can't commit to it in terms of date and time. But we think there's value in there in terms of manageability, and so I'd say we do have that item on our to-do list. I just don't have a date to share with you.
All right, good. Are there any HMC code version dependencies? I can't remember if there was a slide that covered that.
So I mentioned Power VC supports our VIOS 3.1 and Iscuzzy. If you want to play with Iscuzzy on your VIOSs, I shouldn't say play, use Iscuzzy with VIOS 3.1, it requires minimum HMC 920. And what they did was they added, essentially they tolerate virtual SCSI. You don't necessarily do a lot of provisioning from the HMC in terms of your Iscuzzy devices, but they understand what we call tolerate, vSCSI devices that are backed by Iscuzzy devices. They'll list them and let you kind of view topologies and so forth. So 920 if you care about Iscuzzy. Other than that, there's no specific dependencies on HMC levels.
Okay. Question is, oh no, what is that? What changes are in store for the VIOS Advisor? Well,
I think that's a great tool, and we have a bunch of items that we think that where they can add value there. So one item we have, for instance, is some of the problems that we've had in the field with SSP is just that things have not been set up properly, or they're not monitoring on a regular basis. So SSP, you have a pool, and you don't want that free capacity in that pool to be exhausted. Then you can't, your devices can't grow, you have thin provision devices and so forth. Or you haven't set things up properly from a networking perspective. And so we believe that the VIOS Advisor, it's a great tool for sort of checking the health of things. Are things optimal, or are things sort of getting a little critical? You may want to give them some attention, or are things, red, maybe beyond critical. But it also can be used to validate setup. We think it can be extended to validate your setup, for instance, in many respects, your redundancy, your SSPs, and so forth. So I do believe that VIOS Advisor can have some key enhancements made to it that would really help simplify setup and management, and that's something we haven't gotten above the line. We're working to get it above the line. Above the line meaning in terms of in plan. So right now there's nothing significant to report. I do recommend running that tool from time to time to check on the health of your VIOSs. We have all the basic capabilities covered, MPIV and SSP and shared Ethernet and CPU and memory, but expanding the mission of the tool is something I hope to do, so just stay tuned to that one.
All right. There's a sort of a question here on the CPU usage. So the VIOS were CPU, so in this case their VIOS LPARs were CPU starved, and they fixed it by switching to dedicated CPUs, which I have heard can make a difference in some cases. So the question is, do you think that this new version 3.1 of VIOS would make any difference in a CPU starved in a shared CPU mode?
Well, you know, we officially support both dedicated and shared, and I'm just curious, in that example, did you have the same amount of CPU horsepower allocated when you were shared versus dedicated, or once you went to dedicated, did you provide more? Meaning, was it really the fact that we were shared that was resulting in it being CPU starved, or is it just that you added more CPU horsepower?
Yeah, or it could have been you know, the weighting of the VIOS LPARs. And there's a lot of different factors in there as to how it's set up.
There's so many knobs and levers. Yeah, there are so many knobs and levers.
But I do think that 3.1 probably does not. Just the version of 3.1 VIO server probably does not affect the sharing mode, what's happening in the hypervisor, as far as what it's doing for sharing in a drastic way. Probably not.
Yeah, so I do know there have been some changes made. You know, there's various scheduling options that affect how I/O is processed. And there's been some device driver changes made, and it's mostly on a 7.2 base and even VIOS 3.1 in terms of doing certain processing on the interrupt level or on the off level versus scheduling K-procs and using threads. And there has been more of that, and it may be consequential to what we're talking about here. I'm not sure. Also, the fact that we run in now P8 and P9 compat mode, not sure if that affects any of those scheduling decisions. And I don't know how to answer the question, but I'll say we continue to support both shared and dedicated. Dedicated is certainly safe. I'm not aware of any, unknown problems with using shared processors for your VIOS. But as Joe was mentioning, there's so many knobs and levers. I think there's probably a lot of ways to get yourself in trouble.
Right. So depending on how you set up, one could be better than the other.
Yeah.
So we kind of hit the end of our time here, Bob. So I think we'll have to stop. Let me just say for everybody, if you have a burning question, we didn't get to it, please feel free to send it to Bob or myself, and we'll get it answered. Like I said, we have the new tool here. Maybe it's better for some. Maybe others had issues. Please give me your comments on the content of our webinar today, on the tool. Fill out some information on there, please, if you have a comment on that, on the survey after the webinar. So I really appreciate the feedback you give there. Bob, thank you so much for putting this together and for giving this. It's a very popular topic, and almost everybody is using the VIO server. So I really appreciate you coming on and telling us about it.
Yep, thanks for having me. I really appreciate getting a chance to meet with everybody. Great.
And I don't have the session set up for November yet. It will be before Thanksgiving, though, so I'm going to move the webinar up a little bit because one of the holiday and two, I'm out the week after. So please, also you can put in some comments in the survey about what you'd like to see for upcoming sessions, and I look at that and I try and book the popular ones that are being asked. So with that, everybody, have a great rest of the month and beginning of November before I hope to see you back again. Thanks so much, Bob, and everybody else. So long.
Thank you.